Because if you're always surrounded by someone or something or distracted by something, you are never going to be capable of truly understanding what you as the individual need. All right, what is up, everybody? Episode 9 of Pursuit of Balance. We're going to talk about something that's been near to my heart for a long time, something I talk about a lot, and I think it's just something worth sharing to everyone else. But really, this kind of concept between social connection and solitude, and it's interesting when you think about that, how they sound obviously different, but how they're so important for, obviously optimizing health, but then also finding a balance between both and how they actually both positively influence each other. And this is something I was talking about with just a friend of mine. I was just talking about the new generation and technology and phones, and the kind of conversation stemmed from him just talking about his kids being on phones and iPads and his opinion of it. And, it's much easier. My wife and I talk about this a lot. It's much easier when you don't have kids to talk about the strategies that you're going to implement at home with our family and our kids. But, obviously much easier said than done. But long story short, I even think not even just the kids conversation, even though that's where it stemmed from, is really talking about us as humans and how we're starting to kind of slowly lose this social connection and actually lose the ability to have solitude due to technology and due to phones. And, even this morning I was trying to figure out a title for this podcast, and I still don't think I have it really dialed because, I wanted to talk about what technology has done to those two things, but primarily focusing on the importance of social connection and the importance of having solitude. And like I mentioned earlier, is how these can both benefit each other, right? So I want to start off with the kind of the social connection side of things, right? And, for me, this was always something in the community environment side that I talk about a lot, just in content in general and coaching and my check-ins. But, there was a good show, probably came out a year or two ago, and it was talking about the blue zones, right? And one of the things that was at the top of the ranking of all these areas and different blue zones of people that were, the centenarians and people having optimal good health, things like that, was social connection, right? And was community. And it was interesting, even just last night when I was kind of putting some show notes together and just chat GPTing and Googling my way through the internet and trying to find okay, give me some research, give me some science on what actual loneliness does to our health, right? And there was one study that was pretty interesting that was talking about how loneliness is almost equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, right? And how loneliness has led to, obviously depression and anxiety and higher stress for people and people living alone and people spending less time together. And I think it's one of those things that's just this slow, gradual change that's happened. And I would say more so for my generation because I'm 34 years old. So when I started in high school, I think we maybe had MySpace. So social media was just kind of really getting a little bit more mainstream and popular. But we still, I lived in an era where it's you were still biking to friends' house. You were still knocking on doors to see if Timmy can go out and play and ride bike and play sports and, having that outdoor time and having that connection with your friends and things like that. Then obviously through school, that was always something that was there. I didn't have a phone until I was a senior. And then getting out of school in my 20s still was kind of kicking off, but social media really wasn't really that big of a thing. And I was very extroverted in my, I would say the whole decade of my 20s, but really my first part of the 20s from 20 to 25 and just going out and having friends and drinking and just doing things together. And I've kind of personally, I don't want to say struggling, but maybe to a small degree been struggling with this a little bit, but just kind of thinking about one of the the interesting phenomenons in life is that as you start to get older, as you start to get developed in your career, as you start to have people around you or yourself having, raising families and starting to have kids and things like that, you kind of start to create this gap in life, right? And this gap, I think, creates a disconnection socially for us, right? Where we just get so involved in our career and so involved with just raising family that I think we forget the importance of having time with, obviously family, your significant other. I don't want to say significant other is not a part of this, but obviously living with somebody, you have physical time. But I still think there's a degree of actual connection that's kind of missing. And I'm going to kind of tie this in with the technological part. But really kind of the friend side of it too, right? I was just telling Chaz and Elliot right now, I was I haven't been sleeping well the last probably, 10, 12 days. And I think now it's starting to get in my head where I'm almost getting anxious going to bed. Am I going to be able to fall asleep tonight? And, one of the interesting things I will say about not sleeping well is Obviously gives you plenty of time for reflection and thinking because you're literally sitting there in bed or me on a couch sometimes and just thinking about like, why the fuck am I not sleeping? Like, what am I missing? It was normal for me when I was going through busy seasons or stressful seasons with work of like, okay, I'm thinking about work or I'm thinking of what I need to do. And something I was actually just telling some of the coaches in like our onboarding thing a couple weeks ago is like, one of the things that really helps me sleep is actually being, which is kind of a weird thing to talk about, is being productive. When I'm productive in life, I feel like accomplished. I feel like, okay, cool, I've done something today. When I'm not productive, I feel like sometimes I borderline unconsciously am creating this kind of stress for myself of like, oh, I should be doing this. I should have done that. I should have, finished that, whatever it might be. But one of the thoughts, which is obviously why I wanted to bring up today's episode that I was thinking about was like this social connection. I'm like, like one thing that I feel like I am missing a little bit. I've said this two things. One I tell my wife all the time is like, I think we need to move to Santa Cruz. I think I'm missing beach time. I'm missing ocean time. I used to be really good about going to Santa Cruz consistently, and I've gotten really bad over time of just like not giving myself that time. And I think that time is a mixture of solitude, which I'll talk about today, and obviously just the element of nature and things that I enjoy. But then the other thing that I was thinking about is like, man, I kind of miss my friends, like I miss having that time where we were like, weekly and multiple times a week, we were hanging out, we were doing things. And I think it's just like a time of life where it's just a transition that I'm kind of going through. But I know a lot of people because like I think about this when I'm always doing assessments with people. And like one of the things I like to ask on like the assessment intake for somebody with a new client or a prospect in that sense is like, hey, what do you do outside of work, right? What do you do outside if obviously most of these people are not in the gym yet because they're obviously sitting there trying to join one. And I like to ask like what hobbies or like what do you spend time with friends, just to kind of get an idea of like background and lifestyle and things like that. But like I said, if you come back to the science and the research of it, it's very clear that loneliness and this disconnection that's created socially over time, either with technology or just the modern day human of kind of where we're at in life with remote work and things like that, is having a negative impact on health, right? But then when you look at the other side, so I want to kind of talk about solitude too, right? I've always been somebody that thinks, and I think this is really, I would say more of a personality type thing. Like if you are somebody that needs to have alone time. Alone time can be confused with like loneliness and solitude are both alone time, right? I think solitude is this selective time alone versus loneliness is this unselective time alone, right? And I think it's important to be clear on the separation between these two things because when you consider yourself lonely, that is like, I don't have the social connection. I don't have the relationship either with a significant other. I don't have these deep connections with my friends or family, maybe. Maybe I don't enjoy the connection that I have socially at work with my coworkers. Like, there's a lot of elements that can make loneliness its thing, right? But solitude, I think, is this selected time to be alone with your thoughts. And I think to have time for reflection, I think for emotional gathering. And I think just really like sometimes just pressing the reset button for some of us. And I know this is necessarily not going to be something for everyone, right? Like my wife, I don't think is someone that necessarily needs to have solitude, or like her body necessarily even craves it. Like she's someone that probably wants and has the desire more for social connection to, obviously go meet friends or be with her family or be with me or go out on a date night, things like that. But I do think about it, foundationally as like lifestyle, right? Like her lifestyle, obviously with work, is socially disconnected, right? It's just like remote, right? So I think there's obviously this natural craving towards time with people versus my work has the exact opposite environment where it's like I am always around people. I am always talking in person. I am always solving problems and doing things. So for me, it's like I crave kind of the opposite, right? But no matter what, I think it's important to understand that like where this kind of technology part I think is really interrupting it. And this is something I've been thinking about for myself a lot. And I kind of talked about this on a couple episodes this season already of like, obviously rebuilding the relationship with work was one of the episodes or, the things that technology kind of takes us away. But I want to implement it more on the social aspect because something that I've noticed and like I'm trying to kind of implement at home is like, I've talked about this, removing the phone, I think at home as much as possible on time with friends or family or date nights with my wife, or even if we're sitting out by a fire, I've realized that this phone is creating it's almost like this pacifier for us as adults, right? Like it's this thing that's just like this automated response in the body to just grab the phone to kind of keep yourself occupied, or it's a distraction, right? And I think these distractions that we put in our life are creating, a disconnect on the social time that we do have with people when we are in person, and actually not making the time alone for ourselves actually solitude, right? So I was thinking about this on a walk. I always walk Kona in the morning. I wouldn't say every morning, but 5 days a week, I like to take Kona on a walk before I go to work. And I have my phone on me because sometimes I'll shoot content. Sometimes I'll write some notes down for podcasts or just ideas. Like I do like having it, but I've actually realized that like I'm growing to not like having my phone, because when I'm out in the park, instead of just tossing and playing fetch with Kona or just being alone in nature for a little bit at the park, sometimes I catch myself on the phone, right? It's just become this distraction, right? So solitude, understand it is a time for you to recharge. It's a time for you to reflect. It's a time for you to kind of just collect emotions and give yourself, you the time to go through that. But if you're alone and you're quote unquote doing this time for solitude, but you have a phone with you or you have these distractions with you, whatever it might be, I'm just using a phone as an example, you're not really getting the time for reflection. Because in order for us to have reflection as human beings, which I think is a vital piece to life, you need to be alone with your thoughts, right? And this is why, you think about things like breath work, you think about things like meditation, you think about any of the time alone. And this is where I think even music sometimes, right? Like I was on a run over the weekend, and my headphones were dead, and I was like, fuck. I can't run without my damn headphones. They're like, I need it. And like my wife's like, well, I guess just you and your thoughts. And I've done a couple runs like that. I prefer, I will say, with exercise to work out with music or run with music. I think it's a very select few of psychopaths that can kind of do it. But I do think about this with like kind of stretching, like even something with like our model in the gym is like, like the music or the conversations or the chatter or the next class, starting, it takes away from like your ability to get present. It takes away from your ability to really dial down that breath and just get there by yourself, right? So I think like having this time for either meditation or breath work or going on a walk alone or going on a hike alone, or for me, it's like sometimes going on the Harley or going on the Camaro. One thing I've realized about my Camaro and my Harley is the Harley, I'm not listening to music, even though I do have a speaker. It's very rare for me to listen to music because I can't even hear it when I'm on it. The Camaro I love driving because like a stick shift car without a radio really focuses you kind of just like be alone, right? And I think it's such an important thing that I'm actually gotten away from the last couple of years, where I don't know if it's like, is it a blame on technology for us as humans that like the technology has become such a distraction or a comfort thing or a pacifier in a sense is the analogy I use, where it's not really optimizing the time that I do have alone to feel like solitude, which is what I need to recharge. But then on the other end of it too is like, is that also the same distraction that's possibly taking us away from the connection that we do have with people, right? I think one of the most important things to develop good relationships in our life, it doesn't matter if it's like finding your life partner with your husband or wife, or having a good relationship with your family, your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your cousins, things like that, your friends, your coworkers. In order to develop these good relationships, I think like there needs to be a degree of empathy, right? There needs to be a degree of open-mindedness. There needs to be a degree of like presence, right? And when we're missing the ability to be present, when we're missing the ability to be empathetic, that's kind of coming from the foundation of like, you're really not there, right? Like you can physically be somewhere, but you can mentally be disconnected from that, right? And I think like what's happening as generations unfold, as technology advances, and like this is something I say this all the time with like if I'm going to get a Starbucks or I'm going to a restaurant or anything retail, and I like to blame the Gen Z. I like to blame the younger generations, but I will be empathetic enough to understand that it's definitely not only that generation. I think that generation has it the worst because they grew up in that era. They grew up where social media was a thing from a kid. They're growing up with iPads being the pacifier right off the bat. They grow up with phones really early. And I think that makes it hard because we're removing the one thing and the most important element of what creates optimal health. And I typed this in actually last night. I was like, going through the conversations with me, myself, and ChatGPT. And I was like, if you were to rank the things that are most important to have optimal health, right? Which I like for me, it's like what I do for a living professionally, what I'm doing to this podcast right now and sharing information with you guys is to create a lifestyle for you that optimizes your health, longevity, and vitality. I want you not only to live a long time, feel good, move well, be strong, be sexy, but I also want you to feel good, right? And like I think feeling good, and I say that to you to also be a message for myself. Like I want to feel good. I want to be healthy. I want to live a long time. I don't want to run into health issues. And we're like a couple of these both, I think even next week's episode is going to be a little bit of like, maybe a follow up or some of the things that I've been thinking about of like, for me, I'm not sleeping well the last 10 days. Why? Right. And like kind of having the time for reflection to kind of look back on those things. And like, I think the most important thing about having solitude and having time for reflection is then making sure that you follow it up with the actions that are going to make the changes, right? Because when you finally have time by yourself and to have time to reflect on the things in your career, in your relationship, or just time alone, but like disconnected from anything else, like just you and you really start to kind of unravel and create awareness around the things that you want to make changes in your life for, right? And I think both positive and negative, right? Sometimes, I always use this story. With Coach Mike, I don't know if he ever listens to this stuff, but good buddy of mine. We don't really talk to each other as much as we used to, but we worked at Equinox, lived together. He helped me start Functional Lifestyles in the beginning. We worked together for like 4 or 5 years. And I remember the day he put his 2 weeks in or his month notice in, whatever it was, he was like, I was on a hike. Right, I think he like took some mushrooms or something, so he had probably a little extra dose of some reflection, some other enhancing things for reflection. And he came back and he goes, honestly, I just think like I need change in my life, and I don't know where it's coming from. And I think it's really like I need to be close to my family. I need to move to Tennessee, and I need to do that. I need to take that big hurdle, right? And it kind of blindsided me, to be honest with you. Like we had our things professionally that like no matter what, with every coworker or every working partner, like that we kind of like go at each other a little bit, but we had a great relationship together. And I use that as an example because I think it's important to understand that where a lot of change happens for people, it does happen from the ability to actually sit down and reflect on your thoughts, right? To sit down alone with, and that could be, when you think about this like gratitude practice, or if it's journaling for somebody, right? Or if it's just like alone thinking about staring at nothing, right? Like one of my favorite things to do when I think about solitude is like, I'll take the Harley over to Santa Cruz, I'll get a cup of coffee, and I'll literally just stare at the ocean, right? And I'll just do nothing else. I'll just stare there and I just reflect. Sometimes I'm just grateful to be there. I'm happy to be by the water. Sometimes I'm thinking about work and what I can do for next steps in my life. And sometimes I'm thinking about like what I don't like and what I need to pull away. So I think like understanding that time alone disconnected is what's going to allow you to create the awareness for what change you actually want to be making. Because as we optimize our lifestyles over time, things are going to change, right? And I think when you're distracting yourself all the time with whatever, right? Some people are distracting themselves with food. Some people are distracting themselves with alcohol. Some people are distracting themselves with going out. Some people are distracting themselves with TV or, obviously, like I said, social media. Like there's so many different distractions that we have in life that unfortunately become quick little dopamine hits. They're addictive in the sense that they're giving us some quote unquote fake fulfillment, but they're taking away from the ability for us to actually think about what's going on in life. And what happens is you start to see, and this is where, one of the episodes I was thinking about doing today was work-life balance, right? And I kind of feel like I've talked a little bit about that in the last couple episodes, so I kind of chose not to. And I think about this all the time with work-life balance, right? A lot of times we tend to blame work as the problem when we look at the work-life balance equation, when a lot of times it's actually we haven't really optimized our life in order to give us the things that we need to fulfill us outside of work so I can go to work and be recharged. And I think about this with the connection of like today's kind of conversation of like how solitude, when you have the time to reflect, when you have the time to think, when you have enough time to kind of recharge yourself if you're more introverted, you actually have more capacity to create stronger connections socially at work, at home, with your friends or family, etc., right? So that's why I think these things are bi-directional on how they feed each other is like if we're missing social connection and we're missing solitude, right? Or the time to kind of have some time for reflection, they're actually both going to start to hurt each other, right? Like if I don't have a lot of good social connections, it's very easy for me to be lonely, right? And then when I am alone, I just double down on this kind of loneliness thing, right? So I think it's like important to understand that like they go both ways, right? But kind of using the Mike story, right? Like I think about that a lot because I think like, and I don't want to say this scares me, but like one of the things that I really try to promote for coaches is like, I want them to go take time off. I want them to go take a vacation. I don't want them to just work, or distract themselves. Cause eventually what happens and like what I'm kind of think I'm going through a little bit is like, am I burnt out somewhere? Like, am I not fulfilled or not happy somewhere? And if that is the case, what is the thing that I need to change? And Alex Ramosi says this really well on it's more of a business example, but he says never make a big change in life or business decision if you are underslept. Always make sure that you are taking decisions when you are properly slept and nourished, right? And I think it's important to understand because a lot of times we go on vacation and sometimes stress goes down, we start to sleep better, we start to have time for reflection, and then we kind of like, whoa, like now I actually had time to reevaluate my life and what's important to me. And then we go home and make big decisions, right? Or big changes. But I think sometimes it's important to make sure, like why I use the example of like, oh, that sometimes scares me is like, obviously just a little PTSD is like, I want my team to be as happy as possible. I want my coaches to feel that they have good work-life balance, that they have good connections with each other on a co-working front, that they have good social connections outside of work. But they also make sure that they have enough time in the work-life balance to have time for themselves. So they have time to reflect. So they have time to exercise. So they have time to meal prep or obviously whatever fills your cup, right? And I shared that with the coaches as my intent for like how I want to run my company personally, but I also need to make sure that I think about that for myself because this episode got brought up by me thinking about those things of like, what is maybe something that I could change and it really obviously stemmed from how can I sleep a little bit better. And I really, the thing that I came back to is like, okay, I think really what's going on is like, I'm distracting myself with things that are creating less productivity in my life because the phone has become a little bit of a vice. So I was like, okay, I need to change that. I need to kind of change the routine a little bit. I also think that like when I'm home, I try to make my wife the priority so that she has, the connection that she craves because she doesn't get it. But I also need to make sure that I'm not pouring from an empty cup, right? And like, I feel like I'm missing a little bit of that solitude. And I don't think it's necessarily a time. I think it's an environment that I've created for myself where I'm carrying the distraction with me that's kind of hindering that ability to have solitude, right? So I say that as I wanted this to kind of be more of a rant because I just hopefully, maybe this resonates with some of you. Or maybe there's someone that's listening to this that's like, you know what? Like I'm not really prioritizing time for myself, or maybe I'm not prioritizing time for other people and social connection. And I want both sides to be a priority for everyone because no matter what, it's very easy to think that if I'm extroverted, social connection is the only thing I should focus on. And if I'm introverted, solitude is the only thing I should focus on. But as I say, pursuit of balance, baby. I think there's a balance between both of these things. Optimal health, optimal vitality of feeling good with your life is having really, really good, deep connections, right? Like understanding that you don't need a lot of fake relationships, right? You don't need a lot of distractions. You don't need a lot of followers. You don't need a lot of people to like you. What you need is really a handful of core, great relationships that you can always fall back on and making sure that you're nurturing those, right? Like that you're like a thing that I struggle with is like, I don't reach out as much as I should sometimes, right? I've gotten better at it over time, especially like with my parents and obviously things at home with my wife. But like I think with my friends, I'm like, okay, I should probably maybe prioritize just reaching out. How you doing? What's up? What's going on? Like what's going on with you? What's new? Versus like waiting for them to kind of stem the conversations because then we fall into a place where we're in our midlives or getting towards our midlives. We're like, oh, we only see each other with golf a couple times a month. And like, don't want that to be a reality for me, right? So I think that I understand that like the social connections are things that even digitally, I think about this with social media. I don't think social media is necessarily like something I want to blame. I don't want this episode to be like social media is a complete distraction. I use it for my business a lot, but I also think that how it's used can be the game changer, right? If you're doing it to actually foster relationships, like communicating with people, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's DM or commenting on your friend's post or doing things where you're actually creating some of that relationship. I think social media can be empowering in that way. But if you're doing it just to mindlessly doom scroll and you're just doing things that kind of keep you occupied or maybe even distracted, however you want to look at it, that's where I think it's obviously going to be something that's, limiting. But no matter what, like, I mean, when you think about communication, Stephen Ross from Split the Difference in the book talks about this, like how communication, I forget what his rule was. I think it was 55, 37, 8, which is 55% of communication is body language. 37% of it is the tonality, and the 8% of it, if that math is right, is the words, right? Where, yes, we can communicate as humans via social media, via text, via email, but I think that's the worst way to communicate because, like, how many times in life have we taken an email or a text or something the wrong way? And it's because we're reading it the way we think it's being written, but in reality, we have no idea if they were writing it that way, how their tone was, their body language. Then you have things like Zoom calls or Google Meet or, obviously remote work. At these video calls, yeah, sure, they give us an element of tonality. Obviously, we can hear the words now, but I'm still missing a huge degree of the body language and the connection that we make as humans, right? So, like, the most important thing to do with the social connection side of life is like find outlets for you, right? Like, I was talking to a client about this. I was like, hey, this is why country clubs exist, I think, for like, our, as young adults or obviously it tends to be something we think about as retired people, but I think like going to the gym for me has obviously been a big social connection. I think it's the most underrated thing about gyms is the social aspect and the community that you can build, right? Going and finding run clubs, going to play sports, right? Like I have a couple clients that go play tennis or go play golf, like join different clubs, join a book club, do things that get you outside of just work, right? Or just your daily routine. Do things that create and foster relationships. And then don't do it to be fake. Do it because like you have a genuine interest in that thing or that hobby, or genuine interest in like, I just want to meet people, right? And I think about this a lot with like moms with their kids in schools is like, most relationships that like young adults have that have kids like tend to be just parents from other schools because it's like, cool, we actually have something like-minded that we can communicate about, that we can have a conversation about. So do those things and make that a priority because like if you have your friends in your group, cool, nurture them, make it more of a priority for you to actually, nurture those relationships and make sure that they feel that you're being empathetic, you're doing the ones that are reaching out. If it feels one way, it's obviously a relationship that maybe you need to reevaluate. If you don't have those relationships in your life and you feel like you're missing that social connection, then really sit down to think about how do I find ways to foster things that I enjoy, not just to create friends, but like go do things that you enjoy. I want to pick up this sport. I want to go play pickleball. I want to go join a book club. I'm running. I want to go run with other people. And the more you can prioritize, I think the big change of like how you're going to feel in your life is going to come from that. And then the next part, like I said, and the last part is just like the solitude. Make sure no matter introverted or extroverted, that you're giving yourself some time to have some solitude where you can have a little bit of reflection, a little bit of time to kind of just practice some gratitude, a little time alone, a little time for breath work. And that can come from meditating. That can come from a little yoga first thing in the morning before like you go to bed. That can come from journaling. That can come from going on walks. That can come from going on hikes. That can come from just anything that is like has dedicated time alone for the sole purpose of recharging yourself. Because if you're always surrounded by someone or something or distracted by something, you are never going to be capable of truly understanding what you as the individual need. And you as an individual need to come to your own realization of what makes you happy in life, right? When we reflect back, reflection followed by action is where we actually make huge changes in life. And when you can reflect on the things that make you happy and you can act on doing more of those, you change your life in a positive way. When you reflect on the things that are distracting you or pulling you away from your goals or making you less happy or frustrating you or making you angry, when you act on pulling those away, you make a positive change in your life. But those things only can have action when they first have awareness. With awareness, you then create an environment and a foundation to go, these are the areas in my life that I need to make change. And sometimes that action is going to require other people being involved of like, hey, at home, I don't want to do this, so now I need to go talk to my partner. Or, hey, at work, my relationship with my boss, I don't like that, so I need to have a conversation with my boss. But you can't really come to that place just by blowing up. And what I mean by that is like, if you're never reflecting and never having that time for solitude, it's very easy for you to just eventually get to a place where burnout is a thing, right? And that's where work-life balance falls out of balance because it's just like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm burnt out, I can't handle this anymore. And then we make extreme actions and take extreme measures. And I don't think that's the way that we should be handling most things in life. I think it's like if we had enough time to balance out the working in and the working out, metaphorically, then you can make these little micro changes along the way where we can optimize happiness versus just going all in, burning out, and then all out, and then just reflecting. And I think this is where people make those extreme seasonal changes of like having cycles of on and off in life. And like, I have a couple people that pop up in my mind with work. I had this literally assessment last night where this guy's like, I'm all in or I'm all out. And I'm like, that's not the way that I think most of us should be living. I think if we can optimize along the way and we can find sustainability, then we can optimize for the journey of happiness and us having well-being, right? All right, guys. Well, I hope that one resonates with somebody. This is Corey's 2 a.m. thoughts of not sleeping. So I hope this is something that we can take home and apply to our lives and learn from that. Take care. I'll see you guys next week.